And the humble Trevor has some powerful gem for you guys. Please take a listen to this.
From my family because that would not have been allowed. I was not allowed to exist in the space that I was in.
And your grandparents treated you better because you were half white.
That's why I say there's always a silver lining, isn't there? There really is. It's a horrible system, and I'm glad we oppressed it. But
Is that where your confidence comes
I can
from?
look back. No. I think any confidence I inherited came from my mom. Yeah. You know, she's a woman.
She threw you from a moving car at some point
to protect me.
Wow.
And that's really what a mother is all about. You know, a strong mother is someone who says, "I'm going to do everything in my power to get you to where you need to be and to protect you."
And she fed you caterpillars. Like
Well,
you
we-
were like dirt poor.
We ate caterpillars. And you know what's strange is when I share these stories, yes, I hated it. Don't get me wrong. But I mean...
But this isn't a delicacy. This was...
No. This is a necessity. This is a world where you can't afford a more luxurious form of protein anymore. This is a world where chicken is now out of your grasp, beef is out of the question, and so you are going down to any source of protein. And mopani worms, you know, the sort of caterpillar was something that we ate. And I wasn't suffering alone. This was... Communities eat this. There's still people who eat it now.
Really, I never knew you ate caterpillar Trevor.
You know, it becomes, you know, necessity is the mother of all invention. And so essentially, I was in this world where this became a normal thing that we experienced. And because I had lived a life that wasn't consistently in that place, I think it shocked me more because I never knew that there was a place below chicken feet, for instance, which, by the way, I love till this day, you know. And so for me, mopani worms was the place where I went, no, this is too much. I'm poor, but this is just too much for me to handle.
When you started on the Daily Show as the host, there was a lot of pushback, and you even got responses from people saying, "Go back to Africa." And these are like Daily Show viewers. What did you think of that?
You know, I was shocked by that, honestly, and I think I've come to learn very quickly how we use, you know, the cudgels of racism and xenophobia when it suits us in the world. We all have that tendency. Some of us are better than others, but even people who would consider themselves completely liberal and progressive, you will find at times betray a moment where they don't accept, a moment of intolerance. And I'll never forget a message someone sent me. It was because it was so funny and so powerful. He said to me, "You will never replace Jon Stewart. Bring Jon Stewart back. Go back to Djibouti." And I thought, if you are truly a fan of Jon Stewart, then wouldn't you subscribe to the world that he subscribed to? You know, I was like, he's the person who brought me to the show. I did not pluck myself from obscurity, he did. And so I go, so you are inherently in that moment saying, I trust Jon Stewart's judgments, I trust how smart he is as a human being, except when it comes to this decision. And we do that as people. Change is something we're resistant to.
For sure, definitely change is definitely something that we're resistant to.
So are you trying to fit in? Do you want to fit in?
And he was saying go back. He doesn't know that you're from South Africa.
No, I've never been good at fitting in. Like if I fit in, I fail. You know, so my life has been a series of exclusions. My life has been a constant journey of being an outsider. And I've come to learn that being an outsider is my greatest gift.
It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much for your
Thanks,
time.
Trevor.
Thank you. Of my family. And so because I grew up with my black family in Soweto, because I grew up as a part of that world, if I was seen by the wrong person or if I was spotted by the wrong police, then I could have easily been taken away from my family because that would not have been allowed. I was not allowed to exist in the space that I was in.
And your grandparents treated you better because you were half white.
That's why I say there's always a silver lining, isn't there? There really is. It's a horrible system, and I'm glad we oppressed it. But
Is that where your confidence comes
I can
from?
look back. No. I think any confidence I inherited came from my mom. Yeah. You know, she's a woman.
She threw you from a moving car at some point
to protect me.
Wow. Wow.
And that's really what a mother is all about. You know, a strong mother is someone who says, I'm going to do everything in my power to get you to where you need to be and to protect you.
And she fed you caterpillars. Like
Well,
you
we-
were like dirt poor.
We ate caterpillars. And you know what's strange is when I share these stories, yes, I hated it, don't get me wrong. But I mean...
But this isn't a delicacy. This was...
No. This is a necessity. This is a world where you can't afford a more luxurious form of protein anymore. This is a world where chicken is now out of your grasp, beef is out of the question, and so you are going down to any source of protein. And mopani worms, you know, the sort of caterpillar, was something that we ate. And I wasn't suffering alone. This was communities eat this. There's still people who eat it now. You know, it becomes, you know, necessity is the mother of all invention. And so essentially, I was in this world where this became a normal thing that we experienced. And because I had lived a life that wasn't consistently in that place, I think it shocked me more because I never knew that there was a place below chicken feet, for instance, which, by the way, I love till this day. You know, and so for me, mopani worms was the place where I went, no, this is hating and oppressing and a racism that has gone through time. And once you acknowledge that, I feel like you have a better chance to aspire to step out of it.
I'm going to talk about your book. Your mom sounds like entirely fearless.
She really is. She's really fearless or crazy, one of the two. I moved
Definitely, for sure.
between the two ideas, but she's a really amazing woman who I think I've only grown to fully appreciate, and maybe even not yet, as I've gotten older, and obviously through writing the book about our lives together.
She had relations with your dad, who was white. That was illegal. That was an actual crime. You
Yes.
were an actual crime.
Yes, I was born a crime. I was a product of a crime that my parents had committed. I lived in a country where black and white people were not allowed to get married, nor were they allowed to, as the law said, have carnal intercourse with each other. And these were laws that were punishable by jail time. So that was the world I grew up in.
And she got caught a few times in white neighborhoods and went to jail.
Yeah, my mom, she always laughs about it. And that's why I go, she's amazing, and she's also maybe a little bit insane. But she genuinely jokes about it. She says, oh, honey, I went to jail, but that was part of my world. I accepted it, and I knew I was fighting against something, and so I accepted that this would be a part of my world. And so my mom would get arrested on occasion.
And she'd hide you.
She would, yeah. She would hide me. My grandmother would have to hide me.
Because people would see you and go, you're illegal?
Well, people would understand that I'm out of place. So in order for people to understand the world I grew up in, you have to understand how meticulous apartheid was. Imagine a world where it's not just black or white, it's every single shade that is separated into a different category, and every single category has its own benefits and different liberties that have been removed. And I grew up in a world where, as crazy as it sounds, I was considered superior to my mother and half of my family, and inferior to my father and the other half of.
Trevor, so nice to meet you.
Pleasure meeting you.
So I'm going to ask you about your book in just a moment, I promise. But I've got to ask you about that show that you did recently that's creating this big stink. Your interview with the conservative commentator, Tommy Lauren, the one who has famously compared Black Lives Matter to the KKK.
Yes.
Why was it important to have her on your show?
Here's the thing. The conversation everyone seems to be having is, do we live in bubbles? Do we live in a space where we are unable to understand or acknowledge the fact that there are people out there in the world who have views that are very different to us? But the truth is, I think it's more about the bubbles coming together. And so that is me hearing your view and you hearing my view, which is not something that commonly happens. And hearing them and seeing them collide is something that doesn't seem to happen, especially in a manner that's not hateful, in a manner that's not vitriolic. And I think for myself, the question I ask is, how do you then get a conversation started? How do you get it moving? It seems fruitless to some, but I go, well, the other alternative is to stay in those bubbles that you talk about, so why not have a conversation? Let's see where it goes. What do you wish people would understand about you that are in another bubble? What do you wish people would understand about you on the other side?
I wish that we could disagree with each other without thinking that we are bad people or ill-intentioned folks.
That conversation's led to more name calling of her and of you. Like, why would you have someone who's been called a white supremacist on your show? Can you bring people together?
Here's the thing, I think. I think nothing happens overnight. I think the effects of any
That was many years ago.
interview or any conversation are not things that are immediately apparent. I also don't think that it's something that will automatically change everybody's minds. What I do acknowledge, though, is there may be people who have never tuned into my show who will tune in to see a person who represents them or their views on my show. And maybe in a moment, they will see or hear a point of view from my side that they've never considered because they've never heard it. And maybe vice versa, to hear that from a conservative person and hear them say that this is my point of view.
That interview's created quite a stir, including a headline saying that Trevor Noah finally fills Jon Stewart's shoes. Is that a compliment or an insult?
You know what, I understand the sentiment behind it, but the truth is, Jon Stewart left an amazing legacy. It's a legacy that we still feel today. He was a person that came in and created, for all intents and purposes, a genre that has been duplicated all over the world.
I want you to admit that there is such a thing as white privilege. That's all I want.
I knew you were going to.
But I've come to realize that my purpose is not to fill his shoes. My purpose is to create my own shoes in the shoe factory that he bequeathed to me.
My purpose is not to create shoes. My purpose is to create a shoe in the shoe factory that he bequeaths to me. Wow, what a gem.
Nice shoes.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting, though, because he really made a name for himself in the mainstream by taking on Fox News, another conservative commentator, as a blowhard. And now you're creating such a stir with this. So is that the role of comedians these days? It seems to have changed.
I don't think it's changed at all. When you think about the role of comedians and stand-ups, essentially what comedians have always been is people who are outsiders looking in and saying, that's ridiculous, how is that normal, how do you hold those views, this is the logical flaw within what you are saying. And when you approach that from a satirical news point of view or from a news parody show, then those views that you are talking about will invariably come from the media. They will come from spaces where people are broadcasting their views. Because I can't go after a random person on Twitter. That's bullying. That's me using a platform that's higher than theirs to engage with them. But if there is someone who's getting millions and millions of views who shares that, you now have an opportunity to engage in a discussion and to try and break down the flaws that you believe to be there in somebody else's argument using comedy. And that's really what comedy is.
You grew up in racist hell of apartheid South Africa, and now you're in America as it's all a different version of racism is getting stirred up. How different is it?
The biggest differences I feel are that I grew up at the end of an era. I grew up during the final years of apartheid. And I think the biggest difference in the US that I feel is because there is an inverse relationship in terms of the majority versus the minority. In South Africa, black people are the majority. And so it is a lot easier for a nation to reckon with its past. It's a lot easier for a nation to dictate how it feels people should talk about these things. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which was important because it was a place and a time when South Africans had to sit down, watch their television screens every single night and hear about how a government had oppressed and murdered and segregated an entire swath of a nation.
You want Americans to have that kind of conversation?
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? I think a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in America would be amazing. There are still people.
That would be an interesting conversation. So will it be like Truth and Reconciliation for the white supremacists against the blacks or against other minorities?
People in America who don't think slavery was as bad as people make it out to be. There are people who say, was it that bad? At least they had food. At least they knew they had a job. And you're like, is that a job if there's no payment involved? And to have people question that, to have people question the origins of a country. Whenever I hear people saying the phrase, they go, that's not what America was founded on. I go, but that's not really true. You can say that's not what America aspires to. And that is really beautiful to have aspirations. But you cannot deny that the very foundations of the United States.
Oh, gosh, I missed that. Wish I could had the remaining part of it, but that would be a great and interesting children reconciliation. Who facilitates such a meeting? That's something that is. I wish I could know. I could ask that to Trevor Noah.